Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, here with my reaction and review to Game Week 1 for the 24-25 season. As always, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. So what I'm going to do is a quick check-in with how my team did, as well as the key players in FPL, and I'll also do a quick roundup on the situation with my bus team for Game Week 2. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. And from my side, it's all smiles here because the approach that I took in FPL was to try and find a combination whereby I can have the template players, but at the same time have a differential combination. So with this draft in particular, you can go into multiple comparison sites that are FPL related, and you'll see that this particular draft literally has no other copies. In fact, even among the elite FPL managers, this squad of 15 is something that literally I only have. And I think in the top million might be a handful of copies, but from my perspective, with what I've done, it's proved beneficial. And look, I don't care what other FPL content creators say, although you can see a lot of them on the left-hand side and can see how I've done in comparison. Remember this, that a good start is a head start in FPL. And you need a head start in FPL because ultimately that means that there's less need to panic later on and you can be more, shall we say, careful with the risks that you take in the subsequent game weeks. So with the approach that I took, I effectively sacrificed my defense. And of course, I've not just had 4.5 I've not just had 4.0 defenders who I've started. In fact, I've not started any 4.0 defenders, but rather I've seen the value in the 4.5 defender category. Now, in the case of my own team, you can see that with Burn, he got the yellow card in that match against Southampton. I think he was at one point on course for 2 bonus points as well. And there is talk of other potential changes happening with Newcastle's back line. Trippier, of course, was on the bench. There's talk of Gehi being linked as well. And what position would that put Burn in? And the reason I chose Burn ultimately was that with Lewis Hall, I feel that he's fixed in one particular position. Same with Livramento. Whereas with Burn, he's got the flexibility to play centrally and, of course, on the left as well. So I felt that there is some agility with him. 5 points, it ain't much, but it's honest work. On to QUANSAH now. And yeah, I could see that that was a tactical substitution for the new manager and just gutted he couldn't feature in the second half. Cost me 5 points by him not featuring, but arguably Liverpool fans would say that they probably effectively got a clean sheet with him being subbed off. Question marks remain on whether he will start the next match. Again, green block game against Brentford, who surprisingly put in a good shift against Palace. So that is a question mark, but on the whole, can't complain too much for a 4.5 defender. Mykolenko, that was a bit of a disappointing one because Everton's clean sheet performance was fairly robust towards the end of last season, and they obviously shipped in 3 goals. Would have been a 4th goal had the 4th one stood, and yeah, just 1 point there, so fairly disappointing. And now he's got a couple of red block games, and I'll show you what my options are with him. Ideally, I should have really had Mykolenko with a rotating pair, but I just kind of went for him in the end. Could have got QUANSAH, who of course conceded against West Ham. I did think about Martinez of Manchester United, but I felt the options were fairly limited as to who else I could have got there. Onto the midfield now, or my power 7 attack. Across the board, delivered fantastically well. 7.5 million category. I literally could have gone for quite a few options there. Could have even gone for Eze and then upgraded one of my 4.0 defenders for a 4.5, but Jota seemed fairly sharp. Could he have got more fantasy returns perhaps in this match? Hopeful that he starts against Brentford. I think he did just enough. Of course, with his particular position, there are other players who are competing against him as well. So he is a rotation risk in the long term. Absolutely. So I need to be mindful of that as well. But for Brentford in particular, I'm hopeful that there is some possibility that he retains his spot. And then big talking point, Mohamed Salah. Among content creators, of the 48 that are featured here on FPL Gameweek, surprisingly, only 13 picked him. There you can see are some of the content creators who've picked him. That was a big surprise for me because he's got a fantastic record for Game Week 1 since he's been in the Premier League. And it was Ipswich. So I felt that it was a great upside there, and its ownership would have been substantially higher had things been different with the pricing. But with Mohamed Salah in particular, delivered. He was the highest point scorer with captaincy, so you could say that was a bullseye captaincy choice. And there are those who felt they could get Jota and Trent who could cover Mohamed Salah. Alternatively, there were those that had Mohamed Salah and had Haaland, or just had Salah on their own. But on the whole, fairly satisfied with what I saw. I know there's discussion on FPL XL. He might be playing out a bit too wide than he normally does. I couldn't care less. He got a goal and an assist, and then he's got a couple of green block games in the next three. And of course, United got an interesting record against them as well. So fairly content with that. Now, Nkunku, 6.5 million. Could say, if I'm being polite, it was a mixed bag, but it was disappointing. Got subbed off before the hour mark. And of course, he's got a generous run of green block games, and he could potentially be played in different places within that Chelsea front line. But the concern really is the X-Men side of things. I really hope he retains his berth against Wolves, Palace, and Bournemouth. But there is talk of Chelsea potentially signing another forward, so that could be a potential issue in the long term. Am I tempted to sell Nkunku right now? No, not right now. I think I've got other fires to contend if that really was the case. Like arguably, Jota is as much as a rotation risk as Nkunku. Then you've got Gordon. I kind of felt that with that particular match against Southampton, we didn't really get to see the best of him. Of course, Newcastle went down to 10 men fairly early, which was a bit annoying. And ultimately, like that fantastic home record that he had from last season, where he literally was getting fancy returns at every match at St James's Park. We couldn't see the best of that Anthony Gordon. So no doubt he'll hopefully have the chance again to shine, albeit it's on the road against Bournemouth in game week 2. Next home match will be Wolves. I beg your pardon. Next home match will be Tottenham, followed by Wolves away. So perhaps we might have to wait a bit longer, but I'm hoping that he can replicate his home form on the road as well. So 3 points, not the end of the world, but then it makes you wonder if there are other options you could consider, but I think it's early days with Gordon. On to Kai Havertz now. So this, to be fair, was a very late and, shall we say, maverick pick by myself. You can see that among the content creators, literally only 3 picked him, including myself, out of the 48 that are listed on FPL Gameweek. And the reason I had him was I wanted Arsenal cover. I actually had Saka in my team, Saka, Salah, and Haaland, but obviously there's a £2 million price difference there. It meant I couldn't get Jota in as well. So ultimately, by having Havertz, I could also have Jota. That was literally the fundamental difference. I felt there was value in having both, and thankfully both delivered for me in game week 1 with contributions that led me to get 75 points. So yeah, there is talk of Havertz potentially having X-Mins issues as well. He could be moved around. Jesus is there, but he's hit the ground running, and hopefully he'll start again in the next match against Aston Villa. And then you've got Haaland. Massive talk of him stepping up the plate. A lot of pressure, especially after Mohamed Salah hit the ground running on Saturday. He got his customary goal. I believe that was his 91st goal in a City shirt in 100 matches, which is a fantastic record. He's worth that £15 million, you could say. Of course, the yellow card dented his bonus point prospects, but thankfully still got 7 points. Kind of would have wanted more from him on the day itself, especially when he scored a hat-trick against Chelsea during pre-season as well. And you can see that of the 48 content creators, 44 picked him. So that's 44 out of 48. And then Mohamed Salah, 13 out of 48. So a lot went for Haaland. And ultimately, a lot captained him as well, but it didn't pay off because he only got 1 goal. But then you look at the green block games, Ipswich at home, West Ham away, Brentford at home, no doubt. He is the EO captain in all of those games. You can see the FPL points for FPL Gameweek as well, like 10 plus in each of those games as well. So you'd be a fool not to have Haaland or sufficient cover for those game weeks. And that is telling among the content creators as well. We've got Isak. And with Isak, again, same with Gordon, kind of got blunted as a result of the red card. But look at that, Newcastle United had 1 chance. He was involved in that goal, and Newcastle somehow got the win. And fair play. And look at that, 47 out of 48 content creators have Isak. Even if you looked at the data from FPL team, he was literally like 99% owned among the engaged managers. So it would have been crazy not to have had him either. And for many FPL managers, they went for a 3-5-2 formation, arguably an optimal formation to get in Isak and Haaland. But then it meant that that fifth midfielder was probably a 5.0 or a 5.5 at the very best. But in my case, I managed to factor in a 3-4-3. And I said it during preseason as well, that I felt that 3-5-2 is significantly more optimal in terms of the variety of players that you get and the options as well. But then couldn't really make it work with Saka. So ultimately, that 3-4-3 worked for me. And yeah, you could say it was a massive calculated risk. I'm going to come on to the percentages as well in terms of what I was effectively batting against as well. And ultimately, it has paid off. Like 75 points, that's a higher rank that I've had than at any point last season. It took me a long time to even get in the top million last season. So I'm kind of hoping that I've already got some of these quote unquote bandwagon players. So from my perspective, I shouldn't really need to panic, but then I do need to address some issues within my own respective team. Just to give you an idea on the content creators featured on FPL Gameweek, we can see there a lot of household FPL names. Again, on different strategies. Some have got 3 players in the Monday night game, as you can see there with Nick FPL Juice. Some have a couple, some have 0, like FPL Rockstar, and myself as well. I've effectively maxed out without having any Spurs or Leicester coverage for that final game for game week 1. And of course, I'm recording this video because I have no other players to play, so it just makes sense to do the reaction and review right now. And whilst I say that, Dom Slanky could probably chip in with a hat-trick, or Pedro Porro could run riot. Hopefully not, because that will take me out of the top 500k. And if you asked me what effectively, quote unquote, would be a good start for me for game week 1, I would have wanted to be in top 1 million, because then at least you've got like a buffer that you can work your way up out of the 8 million or so managers that are registered so far in FPL. Onto the bench. So Valdemarson, who I've got as my Brentford backup in the event Flecken gets injured or he's dropped. I feel that combination makes sense. The only other options you had for 4.5, 4.0 specifically, you had Henderson, but then interestingly enough, despite all this drama that happened with Johnston, he's on the bench, if I'm not mistaken, against Brentford. So the 4.0 Matthews one wouldn't have worked per se. But then you've got Areola and Fabianski as well in that category. Doesn't work for Forest because I think they've got Miguel and Sells were both 4.5 million. But yeah, Valdemarson at that price, 4.0, and you can see a hefty chunk do own him. But what surprised me actually was that a lot that had Flecken didn't by default have Valdemarson. A lot of people who had another keeper had Valdemarson. So as an example, Flecken, only 4 people have him, and yet 18 had Valdemarson. So I was expecting more of a symmetry with, okay, you've got X amount of Flecken by default that had Valdemarson, but I guess they didn't want to max out on Brentford early on. so fair play to them. Got Harry Winks waiting in the wings as a sub 1, and I had the option of having a 5.0 sub 1, but just had far too many far too many points on the bench last season. So I wanted to make sure that at least with him, there isn't going to be that risk there. And then Johnson, disappointingly, didn't start against Liverpool, perhaps due to them being Liverpool. And he's got another hard fixture in game week 2 against Man City. Hopefully, opportunities to start after that. But from what I could see, he was playing in an advanced role. Again, I'd need to monitor the heat map as well. But again, Johnson is effectively fodder. I'd really hope that I don't need to rely on him. But talking of which, I've got Harwood Bellis as well. Played against Newcastle, played the full match. And maybe I might potentially need to rely on him, as I'll show you in my bus team as well. So that's the review for my team. My main reaction is that the defense, of course, let me down. But then when they're all 4.5, I'm not going to complain too much. It was really literally make or break with this attack of Jota, Salah, Havertz, and Nkunku, Gordon, Haaland, Isak. What would I have done differently here? I wanted Nkunku for the long haul. I really hope that he's still a safe starter. And with all of them as well, there are potential question marks in the long term. But this is what I was really up against. So this is the other important players who I don't own. Just transfer suggestions here as well. So Saka was the main one that can have its cover Saka. In the long term, on a points per million basis, I think it'll be quite close. But then you look at the number of goal involvements that Saka and Havertz had last season. The difference was that Havertz, of course, was listed as a midfielder, so by default would have more points with a clean sheet, extra point, and also the extra point for scoring a goal. But now he's classified as a forward. No doubt, if he got the same number of goal involvements, the points would be less. So probably got away with one there, if I'm being honest, for game week 1. And you look at Saka, just a reminder, Aston Villa away, tricky match. Brighton at home, tricky match. Tottenham away. So there are some tricky matches. I see that some have got Arsenal defence cover there. Fair play to them. Got Henderson. And I almost went for Henderson, but I kind of felt that I looked at the number of clean sheet options over 6 or 7 game weeks. And yeah, sure, West Ham at home seems like a good one, but then London Derby, you've got Leicester at home, probably the more reasonable one. Again, Gehi might move. Wasn't sure about how that would affect Crystal Palace, but in the end he started, despite the ongoing transfer links with him going away. Porro's a big one now, because his ownership is fairly high among content creators. So look at 32 out of 48 have him. And again, I've maxed out on my front 7, so I couldn't afford him. That's one player I really would want to own at some point. You've got Trent. Again, I could get Trent in if I downsized Jota. What's that? So I'd need 2.5 million. Then I'd make Jota a 5.0 midfielder. Morgan Rogers could be that person. Who knows? You've got Solanke, very high ownership. There's talk of him potentially starting from the bench on Monday. You've got Lewis Hall, but then I've got Byrne. Eze is another big one at 7 million. And Smith Rowe, fair play to the ones that have already gone for him. 16 out of 48. I think there's a lot of potential with him in that Fulham team. And they've got a good run of green block games coming up as well. In Gabriel, lack of Arsenal defensive cover from my side. Bruno Fernandes as well. Gvardiol's a surprise. I thought more would own him, but it's only 9 out of 48 or 11 for the 2 that subbed him. Pedro, X-Men's issues could be a serious concern. Morgan Rogers, look at that. 22 own him, but only 7 started him. And he seemed like the only viable 5.0. That's my biggest takeaway from the 5.0 category. Got Muniz, got Wood. Surprisingly, only 7 had him. And I thought that because people aren't going for Havertz, they probably could have shoehorned him in. But then perhaps with Wood, Haaland, and Isak probably weren't able to do so. So yeah, I'm fairly content with how I've done. Covered the main basis, but the key thing here for me now is the bus stop team for game week 2. And I think it was Paolo Maldini who famously said that if I had to make a transfer in game week 2, then I've already made a mistake. And I'm kind of in that situation right now, whereby I really probably do need to make a transfer or two. But then I look on the whole as well with how my team has done, and kind of have got away with one in game week 1. I've got a good start as of now before the Monday night game. So got Flecken obviously in goal against Liverpool. No chance of a clean sheet there. Just hoping that he can rack up save points and really hope for the best in terms of the number of goals he concedes at Anfield. But Flecken didn't seem. I listened to that match on the radio, the Brentford against Palace one, and was very lucky not to concede more than one goal. On to the defence now. So Burn away to Bournemouth without Solanke, but I know that Bournemouth have been linked with some new players as well. So let's see how that pans out. I'd be hopeful that Burn starts that match, but then if the Gahey move is confirmed, then he would be a question mark. QUANSAH against Brentford got subbed off early. I think this is a last chance Luden for me, that if I'm really going to keep him and let's say he gets benched, then I'd literally have to ship him out for the subsequent game week. And I've got Harwood Bellis there against Nottingham Forest. No chance he'll keep a clean sheet there. After all, Southampton conceded 63 goals in the entirety of their championship campaign. Almost same as Birmingham, who got relegated. So yeah, I've got to start him in this instance, and I'll explain why. Got Jota and Mohamed Salah against Brentford. So yeah, I'd rather they get goals galore, even if Flecken ends up with 1 or 2 points, or even 0 points. And Kunku away to Wolves. Let's see if he retains his berth. And you've got Gordon. Let's see if he can replicate the away form, or the home form on the road as well. And then that front line of Havertz, Haaland, and Isak with reasonable games. Of course, I've already put the armband on Haaland against Ipswich, that if Mohamed Salah can get a goal and assist against them, then what can Haaland do? So Valdemarsen's the sub goalie, Winks is sub 1, Mikalenko, Tottenham away, seems a bit of a tricky match, so have to sub him. And they've got Johnson away to City. I think I'm happy benching him as well. So look, that is my initial thoughts and reaction. I personally think that if you didn't have Haaland and you've got Salah, then make sure you've got good City cover against Ipswich. But then, is it too early to wildcard? Well, funnily enough, I kind of put out a light-hearted tweet that some content creators will probably make a video about it being the best Haaland and Salah teams for game week 2 on a wildcard. I actually think that if you had a really bad game week and you're scoring well below the average, you've got the perfect opportunity to address that with an early wildcard. A few weeks early, getting Mohamed Salah and Haaland in, what's the worst that can happen? So that is definitely a viable strategy as well. And ultimately, look, it's a marathon, not a sprint, as they say, or as I like to see it, it's a series of sprints. If you have had a bad game week, I've got a video in the description below that hopefully will provide you further context on effectively your situation. So by all means, give that a watch as well. And beyond that, I've kind of mentioned about ideally you'd want to roll a transfer for game week 2, but then if you really need to address some fires in your team, then definitely do it. And if I get wind of potentially QUANSAH being benched or any of my other players being benched, I'm not going to just roll the FT. I will almost certainly make a transfer as well. So there you have it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. What are your key takeaways from game week 1? What are your lessons learned? How many points did you score? And as always, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, actually, you probably have noticed I haven't done a live stream in a while. That's because I was waiting for an interesting moment, and I will be doing a live stream on Monday night. Further details to follow shortly, but let's just say if FPL did Gogglebox, that's what I'll be doing. Apart from that, wishing you all the best for game week 2, and hopefully Spurs don't score too many goals on Monday night. Take care and all the best.